basically what's coming for the rest of the semester, how the course is going to finish out. So my memory doesn't quite match what this says. I just want to be sure we did muscles last week, right? Right?
Yes.
Okay. My other two AP1 classes did nervous tissue last week, so I thought that's where you guys were. But I guess not, because I guess it's because the conference I was gone that week, different for you guys. But anyways, so we'll be doing nervous tissue today. We're starting the nervous system material, which is basically what we're going to be dealing with for the rest of the semester, and it'll carry us on into AP2, where we might go on to take AP2, well, within this department. That'll be the topic that we started with in AP2. Now, just first little quirk about this particular class. Next week, we don't have class. Monday, the 20th, is the holiday Patriots Day and the school's closed. And to make up for the lost Monday in the schedule, Wednesday of next week will follow a Monday schedule. So Wednesday classes are canceled next week because of the holiday, and then Monday classes meet next week. That only applies to day classes. If you have a night class on Wednesday, like you have class after this tonight, that will in fact be meeting next week. But the day classes don't. The night and day schedules are a little strange in that they don't quite correspond. So as far as this class is concerned next week, we're not meeting. My Monday class will be meeting. And then if you have a Wednesday night class, that does meet next week. The schedule change only applies to day classes. So after next week, when we don't have class, we really only have 2 weeks worth of semester left, but we're actually going to have 3 classes. Part of the big rearrangement of the schedule after the snow days we had involves a change for us. So if you recall at the beginning of the semester, we had a snowstorm that canceled Monday afternoon classes. So my other class met for about an hour, and then I had to dismiss them because of what was supposed to be this big blizzard coming in. And then the following Monday, we didn't have, school was closed because of snow. And the following Monday, school was closed because of snow. And then just in general, there's President's Day, which actually happened to be the next Monday, that particular week. And then Patriots Day here. So there's fewer Mondays in the schedule than anything else anyways. And the snow just sort of accentuated that. To make up for that, to catch up on the snow days, one Friday was changed into a Monday schedule, and one Wednesday was changed into a Monday schedule. So looking back at the schedule that we have here, back on February 25th, we canceled our class because the Monday group met then instead to make up for the snow days. To make up for that Wednesday taken out of the schedule, what the school did was in the last week of classes, which would have normally ended on Wednesday the 6th, the school extended the last week of classes to include Thursday the 7th and Friday the 8th. And Thursday the 7th is following Wednesday schedule. So it's just going to be a little bit strange in general for this particular class dealing with these changes. We will not have class next week. Then we'll have class the week after that, which is the 29th. And the week after that, we'll have class on Wednesday, the 6th, and class on Thursday, the 7th. I know some of you are different colleges. This might not fit with their schedule. You have to deal with that. You can deal with that either by telling other responsibilities, hey, I got a class I got to go to, or you can make the adult decision to say, I have other responsibilities and I can't come to this class. I understand that can happen, and so be it. It doesn't have to be if you're going to another school or something like that. If you have work responsibilities on Thursday that you can't get out of, those things happen. But it had to be that the schedule was rearranged to make up for the snow days because we had so many of them this semester. So these 3 lectures that we're looking at here are really 2 weeks worth of material. The 29th is the Wednesday of that week, and then the Wednesday and Thursday of the following week, we'll wrap that up. It's actually kind of nice that these 2 lectures are going to be one right after the other because they really kind of go together. The nervous system material is looking at sort of the structure of the nervous system and some of its functions in the more traditional, A&P approach to it. And then that last thing there that says neurological correlates, that's looking at kind of the same material, but from a clinical perspective, how we can look at neurological deficits, brain damage sort of things, and that'll tell us a little bit about how the brain's supposed to work in normal situations. Okay. So those are how the next few weeks are laid out. As far as how the course is going to be laid out, we're now starting into Unit 3, which has 6 chapters to it. The first 5 are on the nervous system, and then the 6th one's on the endocrine system. And as a department, long before I started teaching here, my colleagues decided that the place to break between A&P1 and A&P2 was in the middle of the nervous system material. So that's kind of what we're going to do here. This semester, we're going to look at some of the big picture aspects of the nervous system, the brain and its general functions, as well as concentrating on how the nervous system interacts with the musculature, because we just studied the musculature. So we want to pay attention to how we control skeletal muscles doing their job. And then next semester, we are going to concentrate on how the nervous system controls other tissues, cardiac and smooth muscles, and glandular tissue primarily. So that's sort of the split there. One little problem that's always kind of bothered me, but like I said, the decision was made before I even started teaching here, is that the first topic in A&P2 is what we call special senses, which is looking at vision and hearing and those sorts of things. I really feel that should be a topic that goes with what we're studying this semester, and I'll explain why in a little while. But that's actually something in A&P2. Now, the 5 chapters on the nervous system in the book here are actually ones that I wrote. This is how I got involved with this book in the first place. What's nice about that for you as a student is that the book, and this part specifically, is written to what I like to stress in the course. So there's going to be more directed points made in the text that fit with what I'm stressing in class. The downside to that, maybe to some degree, is that the way I wrote the book is the way that I'd really like to see this class taught. And so what I did was the first chapter, which is what we're going to be dealing with today and next week actually too, is about an introduction to what the nervous system is and then what nervous tissues are. And then the next chapter is about the anatomy of the nervous system. And then the following 2 chapters are about the functions of the nervous system. And the function has been split between what's called the somatic nervous system, which is basically your conscious perceptions and voluntary responses to information from the world around you. And then the other one is the autonomic nervous system, which is really the ways that the nervous system is involved in homeostatic mechanisms. And this is really where I see the split between AMP1 and 2. AMP1 should be paying attention to this aspect of function, and AMP2 to this aspect of function. So as far as we're concerned this semester, this weekend, I keep saying next week, but I mean our next lecture, we're going to be dealing with this chapter. And then the next two chapters after that, the next two lectures after that, we're going to be dealing with these two chapters and this chapter down here. We're going to skip this chapter, and it's going to be material for AP2. So that May 6th and May 7th lectures that are back there, one's called the nervous system, the other's called neurological correlates. And so for the nervous system stuff, what I mean there is the chapter on the anatomy of the nervous system and then the functions associated with the somatic system. And then the neurological correlates is getting at this thing called the neurological exam. Now, I didn't title that week neurological exam because in the past when I've done that, students have thought that meant that we had a test that day. But exam and neurological exam just means that this is a clinical examination tool, okay, testing people's neurological function. So that's going to be the focus of what we do on that last day, which is on Thursday the 7th there, which is going to be that. And then in AMP2, we go back to pick up this. The special senses, the stuff that I said that our department actually puts in AMP2, which I wish was in AMP1, is actually a little bit of this chapter here, just the way that I laid that out. And then also in this unit, the last chapter in the unit is the endocrine system. That was written by somebody else, and it's definitely a topic of AMP2. But it's in this system, in this unit because it has to do with regulation. So to go to the material here on the weekly schedule that we have, for this week, the only assignments that you have are parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 for nervous tissue. And that's referring to the first chapter in this unit, which is the nervous system and nervous tissue chapter. If you click on any of these assignments, the due date that comes up is not before our next class. Come on. Okay. So our next class is not next week, it's the week after that, but that's still, what, April 29th. The due date for the material in this week's folder is May 5th, which is before the nervous system chapter. Okay, let me just go back to this schedule here. So what we're doing this week here isn't due until the night before this week, okay? Because this week's material and our next lecture material in 2 weeks, all of that is about this chapter. Okay? I've put all of the assignments in this week's folder. They're just not due until really what would be week 12 for the course. If you go into the week 11 folder, come on, there we go, which is called excitable membranes, you'll see in here that there are not part 1, 2, 3, and 4 assignments. There is an overview assignment. Now, excitable membranes is talking about electrical activity. So we heard a little bit of that in relation to the muscles, the action potential, I said. And that's what we're going to be studying in the next lecture, but from this chapter. And so after next week, there's an assignment that goes with that, which is excitable membranes. And it's actually going, that overview assignment is really about electrical activity in the muscles and in the nervous system. Kind of like there was an overview assignment with, after you finish the tissues material, Same idea. When you complete the nervous system material, once you've finished nervous tissue part 4, this assignment will be visible to you in this folder here, okay? If you look at this folder right now, what you'll see is just this statement saying that there is an overview assignment, and then the lab material that goes in here. You don't see the assignment that's the overview assignment. You won't see that until you complete the nervous tissue assignments in the previous folder. They are all due at the same time. So the due date for this excitable membranes overview is also May 5th, which is before the next meeting. So if we go to the weekly material stuff, week 11 is next week's folder, meaning, of course, 2 weeks from now, really, because there's no class meeting next week. Then week 12 and week 13 are, that's interesting. Because of that Wednesday, Thursday thing, I think I put everything in the same folder here. Maybe. So here's the reading, which is starts in chapter 2. Actually, it says in here, it includes chapter 3 from that unit, and then the neurological exam, or chapter 5 from that unit, is there also. Why does it keep doing this? The part 1, 2, 3, and 4 assignments in this folder are about really chapters 2 and 3 in unit 3. The chapter 5 stuff isn't covered in this material. It's going to be for something that we do in class on that Thursday. And there's also some lab material here. Now, because of that Wednesday, Thursday thing, I put all of this in the folder together. But actually, apparently, I didn't erase the other folder that says neurological correlates. And the point I want to make here is there are no assignments in this folder. So this would have been the last week of class, which is actually now the Thursday after the last Wednesday of class. But whatever it is, there's no assignments in here. So the only assignments you have left to complete are the 4 part 1, 2, 3, 4 assignments for the chapter that we're starting today, and then the overview assignment that follows that in the excitable membranes folder. And then the part 1, 2, 3, and 4 assignments on the nervous system, which is actually kind of covering material from a few different chapters. And when we get to that week, I'll give you a better understanding of what in those chapters you need to focus on. And then for the chapter 5 in unit 3, we're going to be dealing with that in our final week, but there's no assignments associated with that. There used to be a learning pod in this folder, but the learning pod stuff's no longer there, so I completely took that out. So the fact that this is actually the next day after the previous week is okay, because really thematically it sort of fits in with that. It's more materially about the same stuff. There's just not specific assignments associated with that. So back to what we're talking about here. Like I said, this week's material and our next class material, that's all the nervous tissue assignments, including the excitable membranes overview. And then the week after that, on the 6th, the nervous system material, there are assignments associated with that. And then the next day, we're going to do the neurological correlates material, but there are no assignments associated with that. It's just about something we're going to be doing in class that day. Okay. And then the following week, the 13th, is when we're going to be taking the second lab practical. So if we go back to the weekly material things, and like I said, these two are kind of duplicates of each other. Then the final folder in the weekly material is the lab practical 2 and cumulative final. So in this are all of the materials for the second practical. They're just like the first practical. There's an outline and cases and then an online assignment. It's the same format, the 50 multiple choice question test that you're going to be doing in class, and online there are 16 more open-ended questions. The only difference between Practical 1 and Practical 2 is just the content. Practical 1 was body cavities, tissues, and the skeleton. Practical 2 is muscles and nervous system. And then also in this folder is another assignment called the Cumulative Final. Now, the in-class portion of the practical, we're going to be taking at 1:35 in the afternoon, class time, on the 13th. Excuse me?
I just thought, never mind.
What'd you think?
I thought you said we ended class on the 6th and the 7th.
We do end the class on the 7th. This is the final exam period. So this isn't, it's at the same time as class, but technically it's the final exam period. We'll be using that period to take the in-class portion of the practical. Your actual final is an online assignment. Okay? Now, both of these online assignments, the online portion of the practical and the online cumulative final assignment, both of these are due on the 13th at 1:35 p.m. Okay, that is the final deadline for everything. Okay, you have to have all of your work completed for the class on Blackboard when you come in to take the in-class portion of the practical. When you come in to sit down and take that practical, I'm going to get on Blackboard and I'm going to shut off access to it. So when you leave, you won't be able to get back onto Blackboard. I think Blackboard lets you get on and see grades or something like that. Some students have said they've seen things but not been able to do assignments. And I'm not being a student, I can't see what it looks like, but I'll shut it down so that I can do all the grading and get that in a timely fashion. This is a hard deadline. Okay, if you show up for the second practical on that day and say, I didn't quite get stuff done, can I get an extension? I'm going to say, I've told you in advance that you need to get it done by that date. Okay, I'm telling you now on the April 15th, 4 weeks before this deadline. Okay, you have 28 days until this actual deadline. So you have plenty of notice that you have to get everything done by then. Okay. And I just clicked on the cumulative final assignment to show you that. If you click on the practical 2, you'll see the same due date. All of the other work on Blackboard, while it has different due dates in the system, you certainly can work on it after it's due. All of the other work for the semester has to be completed there. So if you didn't do some assignments from early in the semester, whether they're past due now or they're still yet to be finished this semester, you still can finish them up till 1:35 on May 13th. Now, actually on May 13th, it's not just going to be you guys taking the test. My Monday and my Wednesday class both have their final at the same time because the final exam schedule is based on Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes and Tuesday, Thursday classes. So my Monday classes and my Wednesday classes have exams together. So I need to look at the numbers, but I think there's we'll be able to fit everybody in this room. If not, when we get closer to it, I'll deal with how to fit everybody in the room. I have a couple of ideas of how to do that. So that's what we're doing there, that in-class portion. Just be sure that you have everything else finished by then so I can start grading it. Now, for the things that you have to complete, any part 1, 2, 3, or 4 assignments that you haven't done yet can be completed late, and it's not going to affect your grade. Any part 1, 2, or 3 assignments that you have already done, you can go back and do over again, because you get unlimited attempts on those. And if you didn't get 100% correct on one of those, you would benefit from going back in and doing that again. The cumulative final is a 50 multiple choice question test, which is actually made from all of the part 1 and 2 assignment questions that you had all semester. So the way that that test is built in Blackboard, I just said, using questions from the introduction part 1 and introduction part 2 pools, pull 5 questions out of that at random. And those pools, I don't remember exactly how big they are, but they're between 20 and 30 questions. So there's 40 to 60 questions about chapter 1 that are the pool that the first 5 questions on that'll come from. And then a pool of 40 to 60 questions about chapter 2 that are the next 5 questions. Same thing for chapter 3 and chapter 4 and chapter 5 and chapter 6 and chapter 9 and chapter 10 and chapter 12 and chapter 13/14. Now the chapter number there, just sequential, the book doesn't actually order them that way. So it's Unit 1, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Unit 2, chapters 1, 2, and 5. And Unit 3, chapters 1 and 2/3. So 2 and 3 are combined together for the nervous system assignments. Anyway, so that's where all the questions come from. You can prepare for that cumulative final very easily by going back and looking at all the questions there. Now, if you took a part 1 assignment at some point in the past, and you got 9 out of 10 correct on it, and it let you go on to part 2, you might have said, well, I'm happy with that, I'm gonna go ahead and do part 2. That one attempt that you made that was sufficient to move on has only shown you 10 of the questions in the pool. There are more questions in the pool that will be used to build the cumulative final. If you want to see those other questions to prepare for the cumulative final, all you have to do is open those assignments back up. So if you took it once, you got 9 out of 10. Open it again, and you get a chance to improve that 9 out of 10 to maybe a 10 out of 10. You can redo those assignments as many times as you want. It's not exact, but probably about 5 or 6 attempts will show you all the questions in the pool. Okay? It depends on exactly how many are in the pool and how many are getting pulled with each. I mean, how many new ones are getting pulled with each attempt. Yeah.
How long is the cumulative final?
You mean as number of questions or time?
Questions.
So it's 50 multiple choice questions.
How long?
And like all of the multiple choice assignments that we have, the timer is set based on 2 minutes per question, which for 50 questions would be 100 minutes or an hour and 40 minutes, which is probably more than enough time that you need for 50 multiple choice questions. But it does have that time. What was I going to say? So if you want to go back and look over those questions before you go in and do it, you can open those assignments up again and take them over. Or if you've already completed it several times, you've probably got the entire set of questions there. Sorry?
So there's no way we can, see the answers and the questions without resubmitting the assignments.
Well, if you've already gotten it correct, you know what the correct answer is.
Yeah.
If you didn't get it correct, then either you can
So we can see.
do the research to
the
find out what
questions.
the answer is, or you can go ahead and take it again and see what gets more correct. Just keep in mind that whatever your last attempt is on an assignment is the one that goes in the grade book. So if you got 9 out of 10 correct the first time, and you go in there and take it over again to see more questions, if the last time you take it, you got 6 of those 10 questions correct, that's what goes in the grade book. Okay? Knowing that, you really need to take this opportunity to be sure that you get the best score on those as possible. You'll be going through the part 1 and 2 assignments to see all of the questions that are on the cumulative final. But you can go ahead and do the part 3 things over again too if you want better scores on that. But there won't be any questions from part 3 assignments on the cumulative final. It's only multiple choice questions. I used to have students take the in-class portion of the practical and what's essentially this cumulative final, both on the day of the final exam. Both being 50 multiple choice question tests. Generally, students should be able to complete them in about an hour. So if final exam period's 2 hours long, it made sense that students should be able to do one in the first hour and do the other in the second hour. What ended up happening more often was students would spend an hour and a half on the practical, say, and then only have a half hour to work on the final. So I ended up moving it online so that I didn't have to worry about the time crunch during the final exam period. And the first time I ever did it as an online assignment, I explained to the students how it was set up and that they can see all the questions first. And the first student that completed the online final actually completed it before coming in for the in-class practical. And so I just pulled her aside and I said, you know, I saw you took the final and that you got all 50 questions correct right off the bat. Can you just let me know how you did that? And she said, did exactly what you said. I went back and looked at all the questions. I knew all the answers. When I went down, sat down to do the assignment, I got everything right. So assuming that she wasn't just trying to tell me what she thought I wanted to hear, I assume that meant that she did do that to study, and she was very successful. Now, you actually get 3 attempts on that. The way that it's pulling, 5 questions out of each chapter's worth of questions, it's highly unlikely that any of those 3 attempts are going to be the same. You might get completely different questions in all 3 attempts. So it's almost like 3 different tests that you can take. Whatever the best score of the 3 is, that's the one that goes in the grade book. It's not the last score, it's the best of the 3. So if you take it once and you get 35 out of 50, and you're like, oh, I can definitely do better than that. You take it again, you get 42 out of 50, and you're like, well, I can get 8 more correct on top of that. So you try it again, and you get 38 out of 50. The 42 is what goes in the grade book. Okay. Basically, unless you get all 50 correct, go ahead and use all 3 attempts. Whatever's the best of the 3 is going to go in there. Taking it again, if you didn't get a 50, can't hurt. It gives you a chance to get a better grade, and if you don't, it doesn't bring your grade down. So go ahead and take advantage of that opportunity. Now, that assignment is in fact active now. It has been all semester. So you can go in there and take it whenever you want to. So if you want to over the next month, put a little bit of time into this, and you don't have to wait for that last week to actually take it. You can go ahead and get an attempt or 2 in on it earlier. Okay. I think that's all the stuff for the rest of the semester. Any questions?
The final time?
Yes. How? I said this earlier. What's the time limit on it?
1 hour.
No. Yeah, it's 50 questions, so it's 100 minutes, which is an hour and 40 minutes, which is more than likely more time than anybody's ever going to need to take it. Okay. Other questions?
It's pretty much like the one we took before, right?
The practical? Yes.
So it's like the same thing. I can start it and read it.
Yeah, the online thing, just like a part 4 assignment or the first practical, you can go in and start it and save it and come back and finish it. Yeah, Natalie?
Are we going to talk, like the last practical, we talked a lot about the woman who had, I want to say multiple sclerosis, but it's not that, right? The woman, she had
Cystic fibrosis.
cystic fibrosis, yeah.
Mhm.
We talked about it in class.
Mhm.
Like, that really helped me. I really liked what we talked about in class. Are we going to talk about the case in class or no?
No, none of the cases here are going to be presented in class. I use that cystic fibrosis case to sort of explain how case studies are used. Actually, in that Thursday that we're coming in, at the end of the semester, we're going to look at clinical stuff. So there'll be some aspects of that that have to do with the neurological cases. It's not going to specifically be those cases, but there'll be some things in there that have to do with it. Yeah. Other questions? Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, the practical number 2, it's going to be like part 4, right? You write in your own answer.
Right. So just like practical 1, the online thing, and all the part 4 ones, it's those open-ended kind of questions.
So we're going to have to wait till you grade it to see what grade we have, and then we can redo it again, right?
No, the online practical you only get 1 chance at.
Oh, what were you talking about?
You get 3 chances at the cumulative final.
Oh, so just-
Yeah, and the point you're bringing up is exactly where multiple attempts comes from. If the computer grades it automatically, I can set it up to be multiple attempts. But if I have to grade it manually,
That's why I was a little-
I'd never get around to grading everything on time. So, yes.
And so, we're gonna do the practical in class on May 13th as well. So is that gonna be set up like the last one where they're kind of balanced? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. 4 cases, 12 or 13 questions per case, and the same kind of questions that you had. You'll have some stations to look at for some of those questions. Same exact approach. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I might make some reminders next time we meet, because it'll be a while, and just to remind you where we are in completing things. Also, what I plan on doing, and when I say plan on, something might fall through and I don't get to it, but I plan on giving to you, and I probably will do it on the 29th, a list or a report from Blackboard about what you've done for the course so far. You can actually see that information yourself if you go into My Grades. If you go into My Grades on Blackboard, it'll show you what things that you've completed and what things you have yet to complete, how well you've done on different assignments, that sort of thing. Excuse me, my pants are falling apart. So I'll print out a report like that from Blackboard, just so that everybody has seen a list of what's needed. But just like on My Grades, when you go into, actually, let me do this. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Sorry. I was going to pull up a report. I turned off the screen so I wouldn't show you stuff, but I'm recording the screen so it would be on YouTube anyways. And I don't want to show people's personal information there. But anyways, it'll come up. I'll give you a list of all the assignments and what score you have on it so far. If there's no score listed, it'll have a little dash where the points go. That means that you haven't attempted that assignment yet. You haven't opened it up. If you have opened it up but not completed, it would say in progress. If you've opened it up, completed it, and submitted it, and it's waiting to be graded, it would say needs grading. And then if you've opened it up, submitted it, it's been graded, it'll have the score there. So you can look at that printout and see everything that you need to do. It's really the same thing that's in My Grades, but I hope to do that because I want everybody to understand what they have left to do for the rest of the semester. And again, I'll be doing that probably on the 29th. So you only have a couple of weeks left, but it'll at least show you what you need to complete by the 13th. But if you want to know that sooner, then get onto My Grades and see what's there. Now, what I hand out to you will not show you which makeup assignments you are exempted from. The report that I print out just doesn't show that. But in My Grades, it will. You'll see a little gray circle next to the things that you're exempted from. I might not be caught up on that for this class. I can't remember now. I was doing some of the catching up, but I think I was doing it for my MP2 classes today. but I will get that caught up by the 29th when I print out that information for you. And I think actually there's a very subtle thing that it shows when you're exempted from it, but I'll have to have the printouts to actually see what that's about. But I want to be sure everybody's aware of what they need to complete within those last 2 weeks there. Okay, I think I'm done talking about stuff, but any other questions people have about what we're finishing up here? Okay, so let's get to real material. Again, we're in the Unit 3, which is the nervous system and endocrine system, but we're not going to be doing the endocrine system this semester. I'm going to start off with the nervous system and nervous tissue section. To begin with, by way of introduction, I want to talk about what the nervous system is in very broad strokes. Now, again, I did write this stuff, and I'm not trying to say, hey, look at me, I'm so cool, I wrote the chapter, but rather I want to underline some of the aspects of how I've written this, because I think it's important so that you can understand what I'm trying to get across. Every A&P book is going to have a chapter like this, and it's usually the 12th chapter in the book, because the books are kind of always laid out the same way. But a chapter that introduces the nervous system and then gets into what nervous tissue is. What I want to do today is, for the rest of this first part, I want to introduce what the nervous system is, and then after we take a break, the second half of today, we're going to be talking about what nervous tissue is in terms of its anatomy. And then next week, or keep doing that, 2 weeks from now in our next lecture, we're going to finish this chapter and talk about what nervous tissue does, what its function is in terms of electrical signaling and that sort of thing. So in these introductory chapters, in this first part, it's always saying this is the nervous system, and it breaks the nervous system down into sort of more manageable parts, what we would call divisions of the nervous system. A lot of the books that I've worked with at this point, they kind of try to mash all of these different divisions together. Actually, the textbook that my colleagues are using right now, that you're not spending a lot of money on, does a little bit better by kind of subtly making this point, but I try to make it really clearly here. And when we're making these divisions, there's two types of divisions that we're talking about. The first one, which is what's suggested on the board here, is a division based on the anatomy of the system. So the nervous system can be separated into two parts, two divisions: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is everything else. One easy way to think about that, which is not entirely accurate, is the central nervous system is what's contained within the cranial and vertebral cavities in the skull and the vertebral column. The reason that's not entirely accurate is because there are nerves that come out of the spinal cord going out to the periphery, and as soon as they're no longer in the spinal cord itself, they're considered peripheral. So for instance, in this model over here, we can see, well, let's say these nerves right here. We can follow them back to where they connect to the spinal cord. The nerve starts right where it comes out of the spinal cord there, and from that point on, it's peripheral. But the first couple of millimeters of that is within the spinal column. So there are peripheral structures in the spinal column. So it's not the most accurate way to describe central versus peripheral, but it's a pretty good way to think about it in because the brain and spinal cord are definitely contained within the cranial and vertebral cavities there. Now the other stuff, the periphery, is made up mostly of structures that we call nerves and ganglia. Now ganglia is just a plural of the word ganglion, and then obviously nerves is plural of the word nerve. A ganglion is a cluster of cell bodies, nerve cell bodies that we find on the periphery. The one that's being pointed at there looks like it's pointing at the spinal cord. It's actually pointing to a structure that's just off to the side of the spinal cord. Sort of like in this model here. These yellow rubber things sticking off are the spinal nerves. And if you look at it, they all get a little bit thicker right where they're starting to connect to the spinal column. That thickening part right there is a ganglion. And we'll look at that structure actually under the microscope later on. And then nerves are the fibrous structures that extend all throughout the body. Not all ganglia are right next to the spinal cord. There are ganglia in other locations, but for this somewhat simplistic picture, the ganglia that we see are these little lumps that are right on the side of the spinal cord. And the brain and the spinal cord and the peripheral nervous system are not precisely the same shade of yellow, I don't think. And so you can see this slightly darker yellow bulge right here on the side of the spinal cord, and that's a ganglia. And then the nerves are just the bundles of fiber going out in the periphery. Now, sort of keeping with thinking about the anatomy of the system and how we can kind of break it up into more manageable divisions or pieces. When we're looking at the nervous system, physically looking at the nervous system, like this picture of a brain that's been removed from a cadaver, we can see the tissue that is appearing either as white matter or the slightly incorrectly named gray matter. White matter is white because in that type of nervous tissue, there's a lipid-rich substance that helps to insulate nerve fibers. And so it has that white appearance because it's basically like fatty tissue. It's not fatty tissue. It's not adipose tissue. It's nervous tissue, but it has that kind of appearance. And then gray matter is just the alternative to that, where there's not that fatty substance in there. It's not really gray matter. It's just given that name in comparison to the white matter. In very fresh tissue, it's actually going to be kind of pink because of the blood that might be in that tissue. As the tissue gets older, it'll tend to discolor in a certain way. And actually, I have here a slice of a human brain that is preserved in a formaldehyde solution. And holding it up here, you can see there's some darker and some lighter areas. The whole thing is kind of some shade of tan. So really, gray matter often, especially in older tissue, kind of becomes more tan color. Now, that slice of brain might be older than some of you. It's got to be at least 28 years old, which is when our department moved into this building. And we had a budget to buy a lot of things for the lab. So I'm sure this was bought back then when we moved into this building. And it might be older than that. I don't know if this might be something that we had in the department back when we were originally, I think, over in building 20 or something like that. And that far before I started working here. But anyways, it's a really old piece of brain. It is, in fact, a human brain. It is, in fact, a real brain. People will donate their bodies for educational purposes. Oftentimes what it is anatomy professors will donate their bodies to the school where they work. That's not going to happen here. I'm not donating my body, but at the medical school where I originally went to get my doctorate, they have a gross anatomy department for training medical students. And those bodies were donated by people. And probably not all of them came from anatomy professors, but people that want to donate their body for use in training scientists and doctors and that kind of thing. That's where it comes from. This isn't, some poor slob that was picked up on the side of the street and slaughtered for his brain or anything like that. It's nothing gruesome like that. This is donated. It was given willingly by whoever it was. But that's a slice of brain. Okay. And white and gray is, again, kind of describing the lipid-rich versus the less lipid-rich regions. And it's more obviously white and something approaching gray in fresh tissue. And then as it gets older, it'll get more of this tannish color, which is some of the reaction with the formaldehyde that it's fixed in. But that's gray and white matter. Usually when we're using the terms gray and white matter, we're talking about the central nervous system because there's a lot of tissue there. We can see gray and white right next to each other, like in the picture there. It technically would apply to the peripheral nervous system, but we don't usually see the tissue in a preparation like this so clearly. It really corresponds with what I was talking about in the peripheral nervous system. The nerves would be the white matter, and the ganglia would be the gray matter. And that's essentially what we're talking about here. The white matter is made up of fibers, and the gray matter is made up of cell bodies. So gray and white matter can kind of apply to both central and peripheral structures. In the periphery, we're talking about ganglia, which is the gray matter, and nerves, which is the white matter. In the central nervous system, we have similar terms to describe the gray matter and the white matter. While we have ganglion to describe the gray matter, or the groupings of nerve cell bodies, in the central nervous system, the same thing is called a nucleus. Now, in this paragraph here, I introduced the terms nucleus and ganglion. And for a second, I just want to take an aside to point out something that confuses students a lot. The word nucleus gets used in 3 different ways in this course. There's an atomic nucleus, a cellular nucleus, and a central nervous system nucleus. The words are all describing something that's the center of something. So an atomic nucleus is the center of an atom. A cellular nucleus is the center of a cell, not necessarily its physical center, but the organelle that contains the DNA, which really directs what's happening in the cell. And then a nucleus in the brain, which is what this picture is showing us, is a center in the brain where a particular function is processed, or falling apart with a good word for that. So here's that picture. The red line here is outlining a specific nucleus. If I remember correctly, and I was part of choosing this picture, I'm pretty sure that this is outlining what's called the nucleus accumbens. Not that you need to know that name, but it is a specific nucleus. And as far as what it's the center of, we usually refer to this in more common language as the reward center in the brain. So if you do something that makes you feel good, it's probably activating neurons in this part of the brain. It's the center for reward. It's that nucleus. Okay. So when you hear the word nucleus or read the word nucleus in a question, be sure that you understand the context of what I'm talking about. I've asked questions about cellular nuclei that people answer by saying something about neutrons and protons, which is the atomic nucleus. So pay attention to the context of the question to understand what meaning of nucleus is relevant here. Okay. That's not to say that we're only going to be talking about nuclei in the brain from this point on. We'll still be talking about the nuclei in cells and the nuclei in atoms, but understand that there are 3 different meanings for that word at this point in the course. So that's nucleus and ganglion. While a nerve is the, peripheral structure that's a bundle of axons, in the central nervous system, the comparable word is tract. And just to clarify something between those, a single nerve fiber called an axon can be found in two structures, one called a nerve and one called a tract, depending simply on where it's located. So in this picture, what we're looking at are the connections from the eye, which is in the periphery, to central nervous system structures inside the brain. The axons that go from the retina of the eye into the brain travel along the optic nerve in the periphery and the optic tract in the central nervous system. There's a line right here at this structure that's pointed out in the picture, which is the dividing line for this, the visual system between peripheral and central. So everything anterior to this point is peripheral, and everything posterior to this point is central. So the axon, as it's coming from the retina going towards the brain, is in the optic nerve, and then as soon as it passes that point, still the same axon, same fiber, but now the structure that we find it in is called the optic tract. Okay, so those two words are really just defining sort of geography. Things inside the brain and spinal cord are tracts, things outside the brain and spinal cord are nerves. So to kind of put all that together, let me make this bigger actually. I have this table that defines this. So in the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system, we have groups of neuron cell bodies, which would be gray matter, and bundles of axons, which would be white matter. And I just laid out four square little thing here. I guarantee you that you're going to have questions that are drawn directly from this. I might ask you, what do we call a group of neuron cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system? Okay. What would be the correct answer? Ganglion, right. Now, I did the same thing for my Monday class, and I didn't actually ask that question, but if I'd asked that particular question, and the correct answer was ganglion, I got all sorts of different answers. If somebody said nucleus or somebody said nerve, I can almost understand where that thought process is coming from. It's wrong, but I can kind of understand. If you heard group of neuron cell bodies but didn't hear me say peripheral, you might say nucleus, because it's also a group of things. Or if you heard me say peripheral but not group of neuron cell bodies, you might say nerve. Okay. I always set this up because I want people to understand that I'll ask that kind of question. I will get people answering with the exact opposite answer in this, for the question I asked you, tract. When I asked this question in my Monday class, I had one student that in fact said the exact opposite to the correct answer. I didn't pick on him to point it out, but he did say it, and I could see his face when he realized that he said the wrong thing. But so if it was the question I just asked you that ganglion is the correct answer, he said tract. Okay, it happens. I guarantee you, I'll ask this question of you, and there will be a small percentage of students that will answer the exact wrong thing. So please pay attention to how the question's asked. It's going to have two parts: the group or bundle, a group of neuron cell bodies or a bundle of axons, and their location, central and peripheral. Okay. I can also take you a little bit deeper into that and ask you other questions. Ask you the question a different way, where you'll know if it's central or peripheral, or you'll know if I'm talking about cell bodies or axons, but I might not say it explicitly. So pay attention to how the question's asked and make sure you're getting all that information to get to the right answer. Okay. So those are anatomical aspects of what's going on. Really, it comes down to central versus peripheral, but also anatomically, when we're talking about the nervous system, gray matter and white matter sort of describes the tissue a little bit. The other way that we can divide up the nervous system is based on functional differences. And there's actually two ways to do this. The first way I list as basic functions. So if we look at any organ system, I want to usually start off by saying the organ system does this. Like the skin provides protection and helps control body temperature and those sorts of things. Or the skeleton provides protection and is the basis for moving our body around, the scaffolding that we move around. Those kinds of basic functions. So the same sort of thing for the nervous system. The nervous system is responsible for receiving information from the world around us, processing that information, and responding to it. So there's three basic functions there. The reception side is what we call the sensory function. So we have sensory components to our system for vision, hearing, taste, smell, touch, balance, those sorts of things. Those are our senses. And then processing is called integration, where we put information together. Most simply, we can think about putting sensory things together. If you're driving your car and you hear barking coming off to the side, and you look over there and you see a house with an 8-foot security fence, you probably can guess that there's a dog over there, but it's behind the fence. Okay? You don't have to respond to that necessarily. You can figure that the dog is contained there. But if you then keep driving along, you notice that the gate's open, suddenly you have to process that information differently. You heard the barking, you see that there's a way for a dog to get out, so you want to be wary of that dog potentially coming out and chasing your car or something like that. That's the kind of thing that I mean by processing, called integration. And then the third thing, which is responding to it, is referred to as motor function. At its simplest, it's moving your body. But some things that are considered motor responses aren't really movement. For example, a motor response to your, say, the temperature in this room getting a little high might cause you to start sweating. That's a motor response. Your nervous system is telling sweat glands to produce sweat. There's no muscle involved in that, but it still falls into that kind of response thing, which is often referred to as a motor response. So those are the basic functions. The other way to divide up the nervous system based on function is has to do with controlling the body. And I already kind of mentioned this. The chapters where I see the course being split up are between the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Have a question, Natalie?
Yeah, did you say there was a term for senses? Because you said it was motor function, integration, and just senses.
Well, what I said was there was reception, processing, and response.
Okay.
The reception is sensory.
Okay.
The processing is integration, and the response is motor. Okay, so yeah, that's what. Anyway, so controlling the body, and there's two divisions there. There's the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, and I already kind of defined these. The somatic nervous system is our conscious perception of the world around us and our voluntary responses to that. Now, that actually isn't entirely true, but any system in our body that can be described that way would fall into somatic senses. So our vision, we are capable of consciously perceiving the world around us, but we don't necessarily always perceive what we're seeing. You might not realize this, but you're right now sitting in a room that's colored green. Anybody tell that? You know that you're in a green colored room?
Oh.
The reason you don't know that is the source of that green color are the lights in the ceiling. Fluorescent lights have a green tint to them. Your brain receives that green color information, but knows that it's from the lights because you've always seen that. And you probably know that Brian's wearing a white shirt. So your brain uses that as sort of a white balance, just like a video camera would. And you say, that's gotta be white. I know what white looks like. And so it just subtracts out all the background green. Okay? Your camera can't do that. If you took a picture in this room, actually I'd have to close the blinds, there'd be a little green tint to the picture from the lights. It's a more dramatic situation if you are, instead of under fluorescent lights, you're looking at the incandescent lights, the sort of slowly being phased out kind of light bulb thing. Those have a yellow tint to them, and you've probably seen this color, not naturally with your eyes, but when you take a picture with your camera. If you're not using a flash and the picture's underexposed, it'll have kind of an orangey yellow kind of look to it, and we usually think of that as an underexposed picture. And that color is coming from those incandescent lights. So that's an example of information that you are receiving, but you're not perceiving. Okay? Perception implies conscious recognition of it. That's the visual system, which is part of the somatic nervous system, but we aren't perceiving everything that's coming in through that. Okay? But it still falls into that because we're capable of perceiving things from that aspect of our brain or nervous system. And then the voluntary response would be anything that you're capable of voluntarily doing. Sometimes things are reflexive or ingrained, but you can consciously move things. So I can flex my elbow by contracting my biceps brachii. And I'm doing that because I'm sending a conscious signal down to this muscle tone to contract. If I touch a hot stove, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I don't have to consciously, voluntarily decide to do that. It'll do it automatically as a reflex. The conscious perception thing is a little bit tougher to really clearly understand, and it'll be more clear when we get to AMP2 and we talk about the senses there. But the voluntary response thing is very easy to explain. The somatic nervous system is in charge of moving skeletal muscles, causing skeletal muscle contraction. If part of your nervous system controls skeletal muscle, it's somatic. If it doesn't control skeletal muscle and instead controls cardiac or smooth muscle or glandular tissue, it's not somatic. Okay? That's the basis of it. And the parts that control smooth or cardiac muscle or glandular tissue fall into the autonomic system. The autonomic system, I said this earlier, is the nervous system's component to controlling homeostasis. So if your blood pressure is high, the sensory component of that you're not consciously aware of. You don't have a conscious perception of blood pressure, but there is a sensory component to that. And your autonomic nervous system responds to that by either increasing, wait, did I say blood pressure high?
Yeah.
Yeah. So by either decreasing heart rate or widening the diameter of your blood vessels. Either of those will lower blood pressure. That's an autonomic response. That's homeostasis. Not all homeostasis is controlled by the nervous system. The endocrine system plays a role there too. But within the nervous system, there is an autonomic component. That is a topic for AMP2. When I teach AMP2, I start with talking about the special senses, which I'm sure my colleagues do also. And I sort of treat that as like the very end of AMP1, because it's still somatic nervous system. And then in the second week, we start with the autonomic system, the third week, the endocrine system, and et cetera. Those two set up the rest of the semester, sort of how we regulate homeostasis, and specifically the different organ systems. We're going to look at AMP2. They're going to be regulated by those systems. So that's really AMP2 kind of material. Now, in this section, there's a figure here which should remind you of this figure that I showed you at the beginning, and it in fact is just an adaptation of this. I didn't really want this figure in the book. I didn't think it was that great of a figure, but the editor and I, as we were talking about it, we decided we need to put something in there. So what this is it's kind of taking that central versus peripheral picture and showing that there are functions associated with the brain and with the spinal cord and with nerves and with ganglia in the periphery. So under each of those things, it lists the different functions. So there's sensory functions and motor functions and autonomic functions and somatic functions throughout all that stuff. Also included here, because I talk about it within the context of the autonomic system and controlling the body, is the enteric nervous system. That's the nervous tissue associated with the digestive tract. And within the broader idea of somatic versus autonomic, it's sort of a subset of the autonomic system. But when we get to the digestive system in ANP2, the enteric nervous system is the nervous tissue of your intestines, stomach, esophagus, et cetera, et cetera. That's the enteric nervous system. So we'll touch on that in ANP2, specifically with digestion. But those are the functional differences. The way that I'm presenting this here and making a big point of anatomical versus functional divisions, I do that because a lot of the other sources will try to put all of that together. And the book that we were first using when I started teaching here just drove me crazy because it had a figure, which this figure is trying to correct for, but it had a figure that had central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. There's nothing within the central nervous system as they put it in this picture. And inside the peripheral nervous system, they had autonomic and somatic. And then in autonomic and somatic, they had sensory and motor, and sensory and motor. So it made students think that those functional divisions only apply to the peripheral nervous system, and it didn't apply to the central nervous system. And that's just not true. There are sensory and motor parts of the brain and spinal cord. There are somatic and autonomic parts of the brain and spinal cord. So that's the point here, is that functional and anatomical divisions don't overlap or don't correspond one-to-one. There's overlap between them. So there's some of each function spread across each of the different divisions of the body, nervous system. So that's sort of a broad introduction to what the nervous system is. I think that's the end. Yeah, that's the end of the chapter section. As far as what we're going to be doing in other chapters, the next chapter, which we're going to be getting to again on the 29th, is about the anatomy of the nervous system. So it'll come back to a little bit more detail about central and peripheral structures. And then the next two chapters get into the somatic versus autonomic divisions. And within each of those, there's sensory, integrative, and motor divisions described for the somatic and the autonomic system. We won't be doing with the autonomic system this semester again. That's for next semester. So on the 29th, what we're looking at is actually going to be a combination of these two chapters. One is the anatomy of the nervous system, and the other is the somatic function of the nervous system. So those will be together, making up that nervous system set of assignments in that week's folder. Okay. And we'll get back to that. When we get to that folder, I'll remind you of that combination again. But, so the rest of what we want to do today is looking at the nervous tissue. So the next section here is nervous tissue. And that's what we'll be doing in the second half today. And then the next three sections deal with the function of nervous tissue in the sense of the electrical signaling or the action potential and how neurons communicate back and forth with each other, meaning across synapses. So we'll be dealing with these other three things next week with the excitable membrane stuff. So with the second half of today, I want to look at nervous tissue in more detail. And that's a perfect place to take a break, and time-wise also. So we'll go ahead and take a break now and be back in here in about